Coming to the Tainted Tavern, come sit a while for free. We talk about our musings and devices we've been using.
Hello and welcome to the Tainted Tavern, where the hospitality's on top, along with the drinks and the stories, some true, some not so true, but all entertaining. So why not pour yourself a whiskey, fill up a bowl, or suck on your vape or whatever else your vice is, and let's talk movies. Today I want to talk about a trilogy of movies that is not, to my mind, a trilogy in the accepted sense, or at least in the way that most people consider it a trilogy. I recently did a visit to the sex shop for a Blu-ray haul. That's CEX shop, but I always refer to it as a sex shop because it kind of makes my kids do a double take when they say, "Where you been, Dad?" And I say, "Oh, I've been down the sex shop." And those films are Sergio Leone's classic trilogy of spaghetti westerns known as the Dollar Trilogy, The Good, the Bad and the Ugly, A Few Dollars More, and A Fistful of Dollars. And the reason I've introduced them in that order, third to first, backwards, in reverse if you like, will come clear in a few minutes, or a few moments rather. Don't want to make this video too long. Now these are of course the movies that made Clint Eastwood a superstar. But it must be remembered, and a lot of people seem to forget this, but by the time Eastwood did the first of these movies, A Fistful of Dollars, in the early 60s, 1964 I believe it was shot, Eastwood was already a veteran actor, a refugee from television. After a long stretch in the television series Rawhide, playing Rowdy Yates, rollin', 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 keep those wagons rollin', Rawhide. Now, Eastwood wasn't keen to make the movie. He was out of work in between jobs, as actors say, or euphemistically, as actors say, resting. And he got offered to go to Italy to make these spaghetti westerns, to make this western with an Italian director, Sergio Leone. Eastwood wasn't particularly keen on it. But he felt, well, he wasn't doing anything at the moment, and he'd get a fee, which was a nominal fee. In fact, the only reason Eastwood got this role was because he was cheap, because Sergio Leone's first choice for the role of the mysterious stranger in The Fistful of Dollars was Henry Fonda. He also looked at Charles Bronson, Robert Redford, Paul Newman, but the reason that he cast Eastwood rather reluctantly was because Eastwood was cheap. And now it's kind of impossible to think of anyone else in the role. That opening shot of A Fistful of Dollars when Eastwood rides into town is just iconic, and Eastwood looks so cool with that poncho, that hat, that laid back laconic style. He just looks really cool. Now, A Fistful of Dollars was a massive hit in its native Italy, and due to that fact, Leone got a lot of money to make the follow-up, which was For a Few Dollars More. Again, this was a massive hit, and then he went on to The Good, the Bad and the Ugly, which gave him the biggest budget, and he was able to realize some wonderfully composed shots of a Civil War setting. But these films were never originally designed to be a trilogy. A Fistful of Dollars is very loosely based, in fact not even loosely, it's a blatant rip-off of Kurosawa's movie Yojimbo, and there were legal suits launched when this was released which held up this release from foreign markets, which was why by the time they were premiered in the USA and then across the rest of the Western world, all three of these movies had been shot. They didn't come to America until 1967, and that was due to Universal Artists, who were the distributors of these three movies, being reluctant because they were worried about the lawsuits, the potential lawsuits which were being launched for plagiarism by Kurosawa against his work Yojimbo. But the Universal artists, when they did eventually release these movies, they came up with a concept which has stuck with this trilogy to the day, and that was of the concept of the man with no name. In other words, Eastwood's playing the same character throughout all three movies, and that is the man with no name, although the character does have a name in each movie. In A Fistful of Dollars, the first movie, he's Joe. In the second, A Few Dollars More, he's Manco. And in the third, he's known as Blondie. But Universal artists had a brainwave and discounted all that and decided that this was the same character. Well, to be honest, I'm not of the mind to think that this is the same character. I think that just as Lee Van Cleef played two different characters, he was in For a Few Dollars More and The Good, the Bad and the Ugly, playing Colonel Mortimer in For a Few Dollars More, and a totally different character in The Good, the Bad and the Ugly. And it was the same with Mario Vallanti, who played Ramon in A Fistful of Dollars, and then in A Few Dollars More he was a totally different character of El Indio. And I'm of the mind to think that Eastwood's character was also a different character, but with similar traits, and the characters were so similar that they were interchangeable. It's almost as if Leone was made the Western that he was forced to make with A Fistful of Dollars, forced by the budget constraints. Once he had no budget, he thought, well, I can now make the Western the way I'd originally intended to make the Western, but it would change slightly because he already had these stock characters. A Fistful had been a massive hit, so he knew what he was doing. For A Few Dollars More, the character of Manco, that is Eastwood's character known as Joe in A Fistful of Dollars, becomes a bounty hunter, though they're not referred to as bounty hunters in these movies. They're referred to as bounty killers, and several times throughout the movie they are referred to as bounty killers to distinguish them from a bounty hunter, which you would see in an American Western of the time. And then by the time The Good, the Bad and the Ugly was to be made, the first two films had been such massive success that the budget was ramped up massively. And as I say, to my mind, The Good, the Bad and the Ugly is the best of the three films. The full version now, which is available, and I've got the full version on these Blu-rays that I managed to pick up from the sex shop, with some wonderful extras, commentaries on each of the movies from Christopher Fralin, who is an expert on the spaghetti western genre. They did just great movies. But by the time Leone got to A Fistful of Dollars, to The Good, the Bad and the Ugly, rather, that is the third and final in the trilogy, the budget was huge. Far more than he was used to working with, and he was able to paint some wonderful scenes, some vivid scenes of the Civil War, the American Civil War, and it wasn't exploitative. There was almost an anti-war message to these scenes. But if you do consider the fact that Clint Eastwood is the same character in all three movies, that is The Man with No Name, which was a marketing constraint created by Universal artists, but if you accept that, as most people do, then it's interesting because the films suddenly take on a different order, which is the way I introduced them at the end of this video. So that means that the first video in this trilogy, chronologically that is, the first movie is The Good, the Bad and the Ugly. Because this is set during the Civil War, and I've made some notes here, so that this film is set somewhere between 1864 and 1865 during the American Civil War, and you see Eastwood picking up several items of the costume, which would become iconic with The Man with No Name character, chiefly the poncho. He takes the poncho of a dying soldier later on in the film of The Good, the Bad and the Ugly, so that gives him the poncho. But that would mean the second movie then is For a Few Dollars More, which is the second movie, whichever order you look at it, whether you think that Eastwood's playing a different character, and so the running order goes A Fistful of Dollars, For a Few Dollars More, The Good, the Bad and the Ugly, or the other way around, where chronologically, because you assume Eastwood's playing the same character, it becomes The Good, the Bad and the Ugly, A Few Dollars More and A Fistful of Dollars. Now in the For a Few Dollars More, this movie is set in 1872. We know it's set in 1872 because Lee Van Cleef's character, Colonel Mortimer, is reading a newspaper in a scene, and it's clearly dated 1872. So unless the character had written off to archive.org and bought an old newspaper, then we can take it for read that this movie is set in 1872. And there's also more interest from the costume, more proof of this being a backward trilogy, if you like, from the costume. Because when Clint Eastwood's character, Joe, turns up in A Fistful of Dollars, his act has got several bullet holes. And there's a scene in For a Few Dollars More where Lee Van Cleef shoots the hat off Eastwood's head. It goes up in the air and he shoots it several more times while it's in the air. And these holes then are clearly visible in the first film, which now becomes the first film, and that is A Fistful of Dollars. It's really interesting to look at it that way. Now, I'm not sure when I first ever saw these movies. I've been a lifelong fan of these movies. I love these movies. And whether you consider it to be Eastwood playing the same character, which makes it a trilogy, the Dollar Trilogy, or Eastwood playing a different character, which I'm more inclined to go with, I still love these movies. They're among my favorite movies, and I can't remember when I first seen them. I've seen them so many times over the year. So I did a little bit of research, and I thought maybe I saw these first on TV. But when A Fistful of Dollars, the first one, first ever premiered on British TV, it was a Friday night, and it was August the 1st, 1975 at 9:25 p.m. I would have been 10 years old at the time, and I don't know if I would have seen that. I probably may not have been interested in that type of film at the time, although these days I'm a massive Western buff. Westerns are my favorite genre. I've written several Western novels. I just love the Western, the mythology of the West. It's my favorite genre. A Few Dollars More, the second movie, was then shown again in the 9:30 time slot on BBC One on December the 30th, 1975, and then we wouldn't get The Good, the Bad and the Ugly until the following year, 1976, on April the 19th, again at 9:30 in the night. Now, during that period over here in the UK, we only had 3 TV channels. We had BBC One and BBC Two, which were the state channels, if you like, and then we had the one independent channel, which was ITV, or as it was known in different regions, it was Grampian, it was Tyne Tees, it was border television, but that's all we had. There was no such thing as video recorders, and so these screenings of these movies would have been massive event television, and ratings were incredibly high. I can't find any evidence of the actual ratings, but you can bet your bottom dollar, or even bet a few dollars more, that these films had massive audiences during that period. Now, I strongly suspect that the first time I ever saw these movies was on VHS videotape. I should have made it sometime during the mid to late 80s. I did some research on VHS video recorders, and I can't remember when my family got the first VHS video recorder, because they were very expensive items back in the day. But the facts are that in the early 1980s, only 10% of UK households owned a VHS video recorder, or any type of video recorder, because of course then there was the big battle between Betamax and VHS, and Philips was involved in that, I believe, but Philips fell by the wayside pretty quickly. But the battle between VHS and Betamax went on for quite a number of years. Now, in 1985, by the mid-80s, that amount of VHS ownership in UK households had jumped to 30%. But I don't think we had one that early. We certainly didn't have one during the 1984 to 85 miners' strike. You can remember that. Terrible times, terrible times. And one day I'll do a video about the miners' strike. But in the late 1980s, over half of UK homes owned a VHS video recorder. So I suspect we probably got our video recorder sometime between 1986 and 1989. It was somewhere around there. Now, when we got our video recorder, it was still the very early days of home adoption of the devices, and there were no video shops. But people had set up video shops in their front homes, renting out pirate videos. That is a blank tape with a copy of the film recorded on there, often badly recorded, so sometimes you'd have lines shooting across the screen and complete scenes obliterated. But I'd pop along to one of these stores, these home stores, these illegal pirate video stores in my home village of Gilvercoke, and I'm not naming these people, but they served a great service, because a young movie buff like me, who spent his childhood going to the local cinema, which was the Workman's Hall in Gilbert Cove, and I loved movies, we could go along to these people and we could give them 50p, that's half a pound, 50p, and rent a pirated copy of videos to take home and watch and enjoy, you know. And Eastwood was a massive star during that period, during the mid to late 80s. His current movies were things like Escape to Alcatraz, I believe, was 79. We would never have seen none of these on television, because British television, so when they did show, let's go back a moment, when they did show the premiere of A Fistful of Dollars, it would have been panned and scanned version. It would have been panned and scanned, set the aspect ratio of British television, and a lot of the violence would have been cut out, because the British television were notorious for cutting out violence, even mild violence. So I wouldn't have saw the film properly until I saw a pirate VHS copy, and since then to now, 2025, I've seen it numerous times. I've seen all three of them numerous times, and they do remain among my favourite movies. Now, one thing I will say about the United Artists' idea of creating this character, the man with no name, and making this a trilogy of movies, is it was absolutely inspired brainwave. If you are going to go with the fact that East was playing the same character, then you may as well say there was a fourth installment of this franchise, and that Eastwood is playing the man with no name character again in Don Siegel's Two Mules for Sister Sarah. The characters are so similar. Eastwood played a variant on the man with no name character throughout his career. There is an interesting argument that the character he plays in the Oscar-winning Unforgiven is actually an aged version of the man with no name. So maybe his name all along was William Money. And the man with no name, as played by Eastwood, even though Eastwood's not really playing the man with no name, you've got to, and the overall creation to Sergio Leone, he put the movies together, as did Eastwood, and as did all the other wonderful actors, stock Italian actors, some of them would show up several times throughout the movies, but the man with no name went into popular culture, and there were a series of 8 spin-off novels based on the character. Now, I've got them all in my collection, but a lot of them are in the loft. I've got boxes and boxes of paperbacks, but I've managed to find one to show you, and that is The $1 Million Blood Hunt, credited to a writer, Joe Millard, who was actually an house name for the publishers. He didn't exist, and several different writers worked on these books. A very good friend of mine, the late great George Gilman, famed for the Edge series of westerns, he actually wrote one of these, and I'll talk about my connection to George Gilman, the late great George Gilman, in another video somewhere down the line. But suffice to say, I was the first person to bring the Edge novels, that is the first Edge book, Edge of the Loner, back into print after a long time out of print, when ebooks started, when ebooks were at their heyday. But that's another story that I'll tell you another time. So as I say, the man with no name has fallen into pop culture. These are all brilliant films, and I'm so glad I've got these on Blu-ray now. I've actually got VHS copies of these. In fact, I've got several copies of them. But I will be getting not only VHS but DVD as well, and I will be getting rid of a lot of my DVDs, perhaps donating them to a charity shop, or if anyone wants them on this channel, then leave it down below in the comments, and I'll send you a DVD of one of these movies as whatever I've got left at that time. But I'm keeping my previous The Good, the Bad and the Ugly DVD, the extra edition DVD, because the special features on there are different to the special features on these Blu-rays. Special features on these Blu-rays are excellent, but the commentary track on all of these are done by Christopher Fralin, and I do love commentary tracks, but the commentary track on my previous copy of The Good, the Bad and the Ugly is done by, I believe, Richard Skeel, so it's a different commentary. But let's talk a little bit more now, to end this video, about the movies itself and the character, Eastwood's character, and the way these movies were presented. A sip of whiskey there. puff on the end of it, which is a damn fine tobacco. Now, when these movies first came out, we had never seen a Western hero as such, the one Eastwood was portraying. Western heroes, especially in American Westerns, was usually square-jawed, good, moral characters. We had anti-heroes in Westerns. I mean, you only got to go back to the late 50s to John Ford's excellent Searchers, which to my mind is the finest Western ever made. And John Wayne's character, Ethan Edwards, now there's a very nuanced, a very morally grey character who could be said to be the first true anti-hero of the Western genre. Brilliant film. But you had others. I mean, the films that James Stewart made with Bud Boucher were very much anti-hero westerns. And again, Gary Cooper in Man of the West, you know, there were several, but Eastwood's character that he portrayed in all three of these spaghetti westerns, these movies amped things up just that much. It took it to the 9th degree. We had never seen nothing like this. These are absolutely brilliant films. All three of them are highly recommended. Each of these are a part of cinema history, and don't just take my word for it. I mean, Quentin Tarantino has called this the perfect trilogy, although Quentin Tarantino seems to subscribe to the idea that Eastwood is playing the same character in all three of these. That's not my reading of the films, but they're still absolutely fantastic. So anyway, thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe and leave a comment. Come back for some more whiskey drinking, pipe smoking film reviews. Cheers, Yakida. See you soon.
Coming to the Tainted Tavern, come sit a while for free. We talk about our musings and devices we've been using.